Well, Alistair, thank you very much for taking part in our interview today in light of the pre-budget report. We've got a question for you to begin with. What is the pre-budget report exactly?
What it is the government sets out what it's proposing to do in spending, how it's going to pay for that spending through taxes. It's an opportunity for me to set out how the economy is doing. And at a time like this, when I think people are pretty aware of the fact that we've got a massive problem the world over with a credit crunch, with banks getting into difficulties, it's had a huge effect on countries across the world. We've got less tax revenues coming in. That's why we're borrowing more as a country. But the big decision I had to make today was whether or not I could help people get through a difficult time when people are afraid of a recession, when people are worried about their jobs and so on. What can the government do to help? And the truth is, the government can actually make a difference. And
in terms of the pre-budget report and the actual full-on budget, what's the difference there? I mean, why has one come a few months before? Why the announcement today?
Well, it's one of the two events in the year when, traditionally Chancellors come to the House of Commons, and if they say, look, something's happened, something's changed, or I want to set up a new initiative on, on education, or we want to spend more on transport, then you come to the Commons, you make your statement, and the House of Commons can debate it and then vote on it. So that's what it's for. It's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, if you like, rightly being held to account by the other MPs.
Right, because I was only asked because I didn't have a clue years ago. I mean, I studied politics myself, but it's not something that I really understand what the difference was between them. Okay, in terms of the pre-budget report itself, what sort of, in terms of young people who are unemployed, how's it going to help them get the skills they need to access jobs?
Yeah. Look, there's two things. The big thing that decides whether you get a job or not is what's happening in the economy generally. Are there firms taking on people? Are they getting more and more markets to sell their goods, and do they carry on recruiting? Now, putting a lot of money into the economy, I think, will make the recession that we're facing shorter than would otherwise be the case. But in case of specific things you can do, you can ensure that people have got skills and training. You can ensure if they're in work and they start to, they might be threatened with job losses, you can help people get back into work at an earlier stage than otherwise. Today I outlined quite a lot of plans to help people do that if they get into difficulty. I also made sure we keep spending on things like education, on building new houses, on building transport, because that makes a difference for us.
And what specifically, for those who are unemployed, what announcements have been made? I understand there's something to do with employment centres being given more access to resources. Is that
well,
right?
That's right. I mean, if you come out of work, or you need as much help as you can to get back into work. Not so long ago, 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of people were just left high and dry. In fact, there may be people who may have come across their mother or father or grandparents who lost their job in the 80s or 90s and they never went back to work. We want to make sure that if somebody is losing their job, you get in touch with them quickly, hopefully get them retrained or back in touch with another employer, so on the Monday morning they're starting a new job again. That's the way to keep people in work.
Okay, just a couple more questions. First one is just on young families. Is the pre-budget report going to do anything to help get young families out of the poverty line? Yeah,
the cut in VAT will help because that's a reduction in prices. We gave a big tax break today that'll come in next year for people on lower earnings, earning under £40,000. And there's a number of other things we've done, in terms of money for parents with children through the child tax credit, increasing child benefit. It'll be £20 a week payable from January. So there's a lot of stuff there to help families, and I want to do more in the future.
Okay, one last question. It's probably quite a big question really in terms of the amount of figures that are involved. We heard figures about 117 billion that this is going to be borrowed over the next few years or so. Is that right? I mean, because the idea, I'm a young person, obviously we're representing a lot of young people at the moment, and they're quite worried that we're borrowing a lot of money at the moment and we have to pay it back. What do you have to say about that? I mean, is that something that... Sorry, go on.
If I was speaking to you, or my children, I would say you've got to make sure if you borrow money, you're only doing it for something that you can repay it, and you should keep it as low as possible. And I suppose the same is true to countries to a certain extent. The difference is that when you get a shock to the system like this, only governments are big enough to borrow the money you need to get the economy going again. We learned that in the 1930s. You know, for people watching this who studied history, they'll know what happened in the 1930s with the Great Depression. It took massive government spending across the world to get us out of it. And, you know, we need exactly the same approach today. We need to make sure that countries across the world make sure there's money in the economy, help keep people in jobs, support businesses, because that's where jobs come from, as well as supporting people who are perhaps older, retired, and people with children and so on. Only governments can do that. But as I said today, you've got to, at the end of the day, you've got to be able to repay that money. You know, you can't go on, you know, with very high levels of borrowing. You've got to bring it back down. And you know, that's what I was announcing today. That's the whole point of a budget report. You say, this is what we need to spend, this is how we're going to pay for it.
Excellent. All right, well, hope it goes well. Hope we end up having lots of money to spend as well. And understand on the fun on that there will be tax cuts coming in, obviously, and people will hope they'll be spending more over the Christmas period. Or
yes, the VAT comes down from a week today. Some of the other stuff comes in at the early part of next year, but you know, the VAT comes round a week on Monday on the 1st of December.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much, Chancellor.
Good.